I'm Sergeant Major Michael Bosman with the Cyber Training and Education Directorate at the U.S. Army Cyber School. And today we're going to be discussing the Army and Army Cyber School's continuing contributions to the Cyber Mission Force's readiness. So our support to U.S. Cyber Command and the training and education of personnel filling U.S. Cyber Command work roles. So I'm going to start off talking about the Cyber School's Advanced Operations Course initiative and how that is feeding into Cyber Command readiness and the problems that we're trying to solve with that education program. Then I'll be followed by CW3, Tiffany Northern, newly promoted, who is going to talk about how the Cyber School is addressing the readiness concerns of Cyber Command for the exploitation analyst work role. And then she will be followed by Mr. Plotz, who is from the proponent office at the Office Chief of Cyber, who's going to talk about how the MOS is looking to make modifications to 17 Charlie, 17 Alpha, 170 Alpha in response to some of the readiness concerns from Cyber Command. All right, so for the Cyber Mission Force, in terms of training, U.S. Cyber Command J7 Office Exercises and Training is the joint training lead for the services at large, right? And the power that they've pushed down to the services is the joint curriculum lead for the various work roles that Cyber Command owns. And you can see the breakdown on the right-hand side there. So the Army has the vast majority of all the offensive operation work roles: exploitation analyst, operator, mission commander, and target analyst, planner, etc. The Air Force has the majority of the support roles in terms of all the analytical, non-specific to cyber type work roles that we typically see across the rest of the National Security Agency. There are reporters, the other types of analysts that the NSA employs. And then the Navy has all of the defensive work roles, right? So that's your host analyst, your network analyst, et cetera. I'll talk briefly about the executive agency for ACT. So the whole concept behind the executive agency for advanced cyber training, that's what ACT is for, is that one of the actual military organizations, in this regard it's the U.S. Army Cyber School, actually has full responsibility for building all of the curriculum and administrating the training across U.S. Cyber Command, right? And that just provides the U.S. Cyber School a lot better focus in terms of how we're conducting this training, what training we're conducting, and provides a much better baseline for Cyber Command at large, instead of having to look across all of the services and all of the training that they offer and all the various ways that they're conducting the training. It provides Cyber Command one agency and one agent within the services to really hone in on all of the training that is being conducted in support of Cyber Command in these work roles, right? Allows us to better identify the training requirements in order to get to an actual ready force within Cyber Command. So the history of NSA's and Cyber Command's relationship when it comes to the cyberspace operator or operator is fairly convoluted at large. I jumped into that history at about 2012. We had just made the transition from, and now I forgot it. What was the course before Riot, Chief? Okay, so there was a course before Riot. I forget the name of it. It's very, very long time ago. I think there's only one active duty service member currently that actually went through that course. But we transitioned from that course to Riot. And now we have transitioned from Riot to Forge at the National Security Agency. And that is their explicit training to train operators for the NSA. Cyber Command, since its inception, has been utilizing that training in order to train operators to complete Cyber Command mission with NSA support, NSA partnership, et cetera. However, with with these transitions in training and the way that military personnel conduct training and manage training and the way that the National Security Agency manages training and executes training, it creates a considerable number of issues across the forces, especially when it comes to readiness. Because the National Security Agency does not do 2 to 3 to 4 year plans in terms of training and spaces, it doesn't allow us to properly predict how many people we need to push through or get through any form of classes before we run into readiness issues. It's also extraordinarily difficult. Problem slides. It's also extraordinarily difficult to stand up a brand new class, right? If we have a readiness concern or a readiness issue or a class that doesn't perform to what we expect, it's very, very difficult across the services for NSA to stand up a whole nother class in any fashion. So it doesn't follow the same process that military organizations do with the SMDR process and allowing for traps and identifying additional instructors, et cetera, et cetera. And it's also, unfortunately, a single source contract, with a particular contractor, which is almost exclusively local to Maryland, which does impact our ability to stand up new courses and get additional people into the course when we have these types of readiness concerns, right? So the NSA model of training is very, very good for what it does and is an exceptional course. However, it provides the military personnel very, very little flexibility in terms of execution and growth within the force or a decrease in growth across the force. So in order to answer some of those questions, we started a conversation with US Cyber Command and the NSA about a year and a half ago at this point to try and identify a solution that Cyber Command can utilize that is going to limit the amount of retraining necessary. Up until this point, anything that we have identified or other services have identified or the Special Forces community has identified in order to train their operators in this space has required that they still then go through NSA training if they want to do the exact same job for the NSA. So the entire goal of this was not to try and eliminate the NSA's courses or to try and get concurrency with it, anything along those lines, just reciprocity, right? Reciprocity to say that, yes, you can go through this course or you can go through this course, and we're still going to accept them as operators when they come to our spaces, or you can utilize them on the Cyber Command mission for your operations as well. So the Advanced Operations course is the overall concept for this. It is to get after the senior level, which is our biggest problem to date, senior level US Cyber Command cyberspace operators for US Cyber Command mission with reciprocity to NSA for their operator mission as well. There's a lot going on this slide. I'm fully aware of that. So the key points here, the NSA course material or courses or programs specific to the NSA, they are all in blue. Cyber Command specific material is in black. And then the common material, what we've agreed upon in terms of reciprocity, is in purple there, right? So previously speaking, or the NSA operator track is very, very simple. It's what they call CNO-QC, the CNO qualification course, and then they go through Forge 201 through 501. They come out of that pipeline. CNO-QC can be anywhere between 4 and 6 months. And then Forge 201 through 501 is about 7 months. They come out of that pipeline, and then they move into qualification on the NSA side. For Cyber Command, explicitly for Cyber Command mission, the only thing that we had in terms of training was the basic operator course, and that was it, right? You'd conduct the basic operator course, and then you would qualify as a basic operator, and then you would work through in an on-the-job training manner through the senior cyberspace operator qualification, and then become a senior cyberspace operator, right? But that process previously did not have any reciprocity with NSA. So a senior cyberspace operator, even though they are inherently doing a very, very similar job, are not able to move then into NSA spaces to conduct the same mission. This path allows us to do both, right? Allows at the senior level operators to do both and provides us a great amount of flexibility in terms of what courses are available, when to put people into courses, and then being able to move that number up and down, right? I may need 150 personnel one year. I may not need 150 personnel the next year, right? Through the SMDR process, we can do that a lot easier. So personnel moving forward will go through CNOQC. We're still having that same common baseline with the NSA personnel so that there's a common technical baseline that all operators share, right? Cyber Command personnel will then move through the basic operations course, because while they are very similar functions in name, NSA and Cyber Command operations are inherently very different in terms of scope, risk, etc. So they come through the basic operations course to understand what that difference is and how to conduct operations for Cyber Command. They will qualify for basic operator at some point in time after that. Then they move on to AOC-A or Forge 201 through 501. We're not shutting that door in any way, shape, or form. Cyber Command is still going to maintain seats for Forge. They're still going to send people through that pipeline as well. But AOC-A gives us a whole another set of training to be able to send people through that is a lot more flexible and meets the military need a lot easier. After AOC-A or Forge 201 through 501, U.S. Cyber Command folks will then go through AOCP, the AOC procedures course. Again, our operations are very different. They need to understand how to do that at the senior level. There's a whole other set of policy and guidance for U.S. Cyber Command that our senior operators need to learn, and we need to start setting that baseline standard because that baseline standard has been simply set in OJT, which if you've ever done OJT in one place for the same job and then gone to another place, it's typically pretty different. So setting the standard for how Cyber Command operators conduct operations is one of the inherent functions within AOCP. And then they're going to be able to qualify. They'll then be able to move on to either Senior Cyberspace Operator for USCC or operations for NSA and qualify in either, or both, whatever is the need of the actual commander at that time, right? That can be at the JFHQ commander level, that can be at the team lead level, whatever that leadership needs, that's what that operator is then able to flex into. This is generally where we're at right now with everything. So we started this process back in first quarter FY23. As we stand right now, the very first pilot of AOC-A is completing this week. They will be graduating on Monday. Phenomenal success with that group of students, 20 students, 5 GIACs, 8 SANS classes. All but one person has passed every single GIAC so far. So that is GPEN, that's GWAPT, GCFA, GDAT, and GXPEN. And 100% pass rate aside from one test, one person, unfortunately. But extraordinary success. Our second pilot of AOC-A is running right now as well. So already really good success from them as well. They'll be taking their GWAPT this week. AOCP is currently in development. I have 2 former NSA operators and 1 former NSA developer as part of the crew developing AOCP, and that's just developing it from all of the Cyber Command guidance and policy in terms of doing operations, right? It'll be a 7-week course, and we'll be conducting our first pilot of that course in January 2024. This is a breakdown of AOC-A and all the courses that were agreed upon by the Cyber School, Cyber Command, and NSA. So this curriculum provides Cyber Command bodies the reciprocity to Forge 201 through 501. Right? We are well aware it is not the exact same in any way, shape, or form. However, the agreement, I think, is for the best. Realistically, the Forge pipeline is a great course. They built it over the course of about 3 years. However, it is still very narrow in its scope. in terms of what it's teaching for and who it's teaching to. And the scope that we are able to reach with partnering with SANS and the techniques and availability of what is out there in the world today gets us a lot closer to what we want our Cyber Command operators to be doing on a daily basis. And then there you see so the requirement from NSA is that they complete all 8 SANS courses and that they have all 5 of those GIACs in order to get that reciprocity. So every student has to attempt the GIAC. They do 2 GIAC attempts during the course, and that results in their pass or fail of the course at large. Like I mentioned, AOCP is under development right now. We'll be piloting that in January 2024, and then a second pilot in June 2024. The course's scope is primarily focused on all of the policy and guidance that Cyber Command has issued in terms of how we do operations, right? So taking that basic operator from assisting the senior population and doing low-level, low-risk operations to how do I conduct these higher-risk operations. And that is my brief. I'll now pass it on to Chief Northern.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to use the podium over here. All right, my name is CW3 Tiffany Northern. I am currently acting as the Joint Curriculum Lead Tech Advisor for the U.S. Army Cyber and EW School. I am going to be talking a little bit about what we are doing in our collaborative efforts with NSA and CYBERCOM to identify an effective and efficient manner to train our exploitation analysts, very similar to what you just heard from Sergeant Major Bosman with the operator. So to give you a little background, in 2019, the U.S. Army Cyber School, along with our Cyber, NSA, and CYBERCOM, conducted a review of the current Cyber Mission Force training pipeline, as well as the CYBERCOM exploitation analyst knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks. What we identified was that the current training path to train U.S. CYBERCOM EAs depended heavily on NSA training, and we were training our CYBERCOM EAs to meet NSA standards. Along with that, we recognized that the operational force had to conduct extensive on-the-job training in order to teach some of these CYBERCOM standards, policies, and procedures that an EA needs in order to be productive within the operational force. And as we did the analysis with the training courses, by reviewing the learning objectives of each one of those courses and mapping those to the CYBERCOM EA KSAs and tasks, knowledge, skills, and abilities and tasks, we recognized that over 60% of the CYBERCOM KSAs and tasks were not covered in the current training pipeline. So in slide 2, we kind of depicted what this training path looked like. As you can see, we're following the same trend as you saw with the operator framework, where the blue indicates NSA training. Oh, it didn't work. Sorry. It's here on the screen. There we go. All right. Thank you. Where the blue indicates NSA training, the black indicates CYBERCOM training, and the purple indicates material that we recognized as being applicative to both NSA and CYBERCOM exploitation analysts. So as you can see, that with the current training path, there's a lot of blue, right? And at the bottom, you can also see the breakdown of the knowledge, skills, and abilities and how we identified the coverage of 60% not being covered. And once again, that review was with the learning objectives that were outlined in the training requirements and mapping those to the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the U.S. CYBERCOM exploitation analysts. So what we had decided to sorry, my slides are a little different, which is fine. So what we proposed was the EA training path solution that not only recognizes the curriculum that can apply to both Cybercom and NSA, but also institutionalizing the training that teaches exploitation analysts the standards, policies, and procedures of Cybercom in a class framework. What we have developed is the basic exploitation analyst course. We also use the same framework from academics and procedures as you saw with the operator. In this procedures course, we are teaching exploitation analysts the analytic foundations to cover USCYBERCOM knowledge, skills, and abilities and tasks, and to cover that 60% training gap that you saw in the current training pipeline on the previous slide. This eventually will be in addition to the USCYBERCOM EA training path for basic EAs, and hopefully allow the operational force to continue their warfighting efforts while we are teaching at this U.S. Army Cyber School. Additionally, with this training framework, what we wanted to do is identify and codify a training framework that not only meets the USCYBERCOM operational requirements, but also provides the training from Cybercom operational standards to meet the KSAs and tasks, as well as provide those commanders, the operational commanders, the flexibility to train their personnel based off of their operational requirements. So what that really means is, instead of sending all of our Cybercom EAs to go down the NSA training path and certification path, which is a very extensive process, we are saying that you can take an exploitation analyst, a Cybercom exploitation analyst, train them if you have a mission that is heavily dependent on USCYBERCOM infrastructure versus NSA infrastructure. So this framework that we are proposing allows that. You will also see at the proficiency levels, we are proposing that at the basics side of the house, we have that commonality framework at the base, or the BEAC, the basic EA course academics, where that commonality or that reciprocity, as Sergeant Major Bosman alluded to, is the same for both Cybercom and NSA EAs. We also recognize that there is foundational training or fundamental training that, although is NSA specific, there are opportunities to where we could look to push that training to the left. For our senior exploitation analyst, Cybercom senior exploitation analyst, we recognize that there is a way to build from our basic EA course to create a senior EA course in the future. However, we're still conducting full analysis with the operational force to identify if that is the right course of action, or if there are other courses of action to ensure that we're training our force to be effective and efficient in a timely manner for the commanders to use in the operational realm. With that, I will be followed by Mr. Plotz.
Good morning. John Plotz. I'm the Office Chief of Cyber Enlisted Division Chief. I'm going to talk to you briefly this morning. I have one slide, so I don't have to worry about flipping. All right. I'm going to talk about personnel and position coding of cyber work roles. So currently, positions, so DoD has mandated that all positions be coded with cyber work roles based on the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework coding system. Some of the current cyber work roles are not included in the DCWF tables. So supposedly they will be at some point, but right now they're not. So the coding is a 3-digit code for each work role, and then a 3-digit code for each proficiency level for each cyber work role position. So that has to be added to all the TDAs and MTOs, and that process is ongoing now. On the personnel side of things, so now we also need to map work roles and proficiency levels for the personnel, for the individuals in those positions. So current Army systems allow for 9 digits in an MOS or AOC code. We can't put a 6-digit DCWF code in a 9-digit MOS. Right? So we're working a method to allow the Army to code both positions and individuals to work role and proficiency level fidelity. So the concept, we are working to develop an Army regulation. So this will be similar to AR 11-6, the Army language program. Right? So if you're familiar with Army language program, the last 2 digits of every 9-digit MOS or AOC is for a language code. Right? So our intent is to piggyback off of that regulation and create the Army Cyber Certification Program, which will use those last 2 digits to specify both the work role and the proficiency level. So when this is done, this will allow for tracking of individuals by work role and proficiency level. And it'll also allow for reporting purposes. So let me back up just a moment. So one method currently to track personnel, recently HQDA approved PDSIs, or Professional Development Skill Identifiers, for 10 or 11 of the work roles. Right? So there's 33 different codes or PDSIs that have just been approved for each work role and each proficiency level. The problem with that is those are for personnel coding only and cannot be used on authorization documents. So that's another thing that we're solving with the not using the 9-digit MOS code or the certification program. So this allows tracking of both the individuals, and it allows visibility of the requirements at a UIC level on all the manning documents. That simplifies reporting requirements up to CYBERCOM. Right? Another thing that this does for us is it allows us to establish a proficiency pay program. So currently, if you're familiar with Cyber Assignment Incentive Pay, CAPE, so our cyber has to fund that and fight for funding to pay CAPE every year. Right? So since this would be in an Army regulation, this brings us into the Army level, HQDA level budgeting and programming process. So it takes the fight for funding for proficiency pay off the table and puts it in the big Army bucket. Finally, I think that this would help with requisitioning, because we have the requirements on both the manning documents and the personnel. So through the G1 channels on requisitions, it'll improve that process as well. So we're just at the cyber school. We cannot be the proponent of an Army regulation. We require HQDA level to be the proponent and the executive agent. So our intent now is we're developing the AR. We'll work out as many of the issues with it as we can, working with our cyber, and then the intent is to pass it off to DAMO SOC, who will act as the executive agent and the Army proponent for the Army regulation. And so that, in a nutshell, is our way forward. Thank you.
All right. So at this time, if you have questions, I believe the mic should be in the center. This is the opportunity for you guys to ask any questions that you may have on anything that was briefed.
Hi, my name's Casimir Zeiper, Air Force. I respect what you're doing with the AOC course. My questions, and maybe I don't know if you've thought it through, like CNOQC written into the code of Ginkgo. We're locked into that. We can't even really extract it out. The vendor doesn't support scaling that in a federated model. What I heard you describe for AOC was essentially a bunch of approved SANS courses. So my question is, on that AOC course, who owns it? Does the U.S. Army own it, or the constituent parts that are SANS? And going forward with that, if we wanted to scale it, we're stuck with a single vendor model on it, or does the Army own it and tailored it to their, to the requirement, to the joint requirement as is specified. And again, back to in a federated model where if we're training and doing that, because way back in the day when we were in the Pentagon going through the SIFMID and all that, it was about building a federated training model that was government-owned and controlled, because essentially if it is any, and it's not just this thing, it's any of them, but if it's all vendor-supplied training, we're not building a DoD training course that anybody any place else can't replicate. And there's a lot to unpack there. But principally, I'm just interested in who owns the course, and we thought through, okay, we're plus 5 years, a cost structure and scalability of that cost, and I'll sit down.
Yeah, so lot to unpack, but thank you, great question. Yes, in terms of AOCA, we are 100% locked in with SANS. In terms of, they own their content and we utilize their content in order to teach that academics portion. Why we're utilizing them is because there is a considerable amount of unclassified academics necessary to make that transition from basic operator to senior operator. What I can say is that SANS provides us a number of modalities that the current structure under either CNOQC or Forge simply do not allow us to do. It also allows us, the cyber school, or follow-on organizations, either the Air Force or the Navy, whether they move via NITRO agreement with the cyber school or invest in their own method of conducting these courses. It provides a level of flexibility that we just can't get in the current construct of how CNOQC and Forge are being ran, right? So they don't, we won't own any of that content. That will be owned by SANS. However, we balance that out with owning the procedures portions of both the basic operator portion and the advanced operator portion. By owning that content, we can even federate that out even more. AOCP is being developed explicitly into TSP-CTE in order to improve the federation of that content and enable the other services to train at whatever location it is that they want to establish, their instance of TSP-CTE. And BOC will be moving into TSP-CTE within the next year and a half as well, to better enable all of the services, right? We already partner with the Air Force to provide what they call AFBOC, which is just BOC with a couple of Air Force logos thrown onto it. But that is in foremost of our mind. We're really trying to ensure that we're enabling not just the Army personnel to go through these courses, but we're also enabling the rest of the services as well and maintaining that joint mindset as we build this out. And we're continuing various conversations with both NSA and Cyber Command in terms of what do we do about CNOQC into the future. So that's part of the discussions going forward as well.
Hey, I'm Scott Smith. I'm the director of training, so both the chief and sergeant working. So critical to this is when they talk about reciprocity. So the reciprocity is, this is the General Custodian, so the reciprocity is with those 8 SANS courses. Again, it doesn't matter how, let's say, a soldier gets those 8 SANS courses. They can come through AOCA and spend almost 20 weeks going through kind of back to back to back, or if they
Yes, sir.
Tech piece, where do you need help from technology to increase the speed of learning and training and also validate the learning and training, at the end of the pipeline, things like simulated operations and, like automation, things like that? Where do you need help with that kind of thing?
So really, we're in the, we're still in the development process for AOCP. We've been utilizing the virtual training area for the cyber school that they have stood up for BOC for the last couple of years, but it's going to be a really great experiment to figure out. Nobody under Cyber Command's banner has put anything onto TSPCTE in terms of courses or direct simulation in this manner outside of exercises. So nobody's developed inside of TS on the TS side. We've had some courses that have been developed into PCTE on the unclassed side, predominantly by the Navy so far. But there's been capacity issues across the board with unclassified PCTE, and that's had considerable additional challenges. So doing it in this manner is, I don't think we're at the stage yet where we can identify what additional technologies we need to be successful. It's an ongoing development, and I don't expect us to come out of. We're not expected to come fully out of pilot until FY26 for AOCP. We expect to move into full delivery in FY25 at some point in time, but it still will be in pilot as we continue to tweak and modify the course.
Just to kind of caveat or piggyback off of that, I think although we are in the developmental stages right now, I think it's key for identifying. You're right. We are not at the stage of identifying technologies, but we do have to identify a way that we can train our force in a simulated environment that captures the same level of TTPs that we're seeing in the operational force in order to train them appropriately once they come out of our training. So that is something that, once again, Sergeant Major Bosman, we've known each other for a very long time. Just as he said, yes, we're in that developmental stages, but this is this time where we're trying to identify how do we train across all services in that federated model by providing them simulated environments to train and get the reps and sets in that they need to be successful. Yes, Sergeant Major Potter.
So, Chief, you weren't going to escape, so I'm going to. It's not even a hardball one. But on your slide specifically, there's two questions. So there was an asterisk that specifically addressed CSED 3111, that CCTC with equivalence. So as I read that, and I want to make sure that I'm correct, a 17 Charlie AIT student that completes 17 Charlie AIT, because CCTC is a portion of the curriculum, that individual would then receive constructive credit for CSED 3111 and then would not have to complete that class as part of the EA pipeline, correct?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? We at the schoolhouse have been working for many years of trying to get NSA to recognize CCTC as equivalent to CSED 3111. And what we have identified is that is a very long process, and it has a lot of challenges with it. I believe we're still continuing those efforts. However, we are also looking at other ways that we can get that constructive criticism for our 17 series training to then get that same level of reciprocity with some of the NSA training. I would say, once again, that is in a developmental process stage. We're recognizing that there is not only from the Army standpoint, but as well as the other services, there is initial training that does get some level of equivalency with the NSA, and that's just because they've worked through that process, right? So I would say currently at the time right now that is not the case. However, the schoolhouse is going to continue to work in a collaborative manner with NSA and CYBERCOM to identify a way to gain that level of reciprocity for some of our curriculum so they're not going through some of the same training again.
So that then carries into the second question. So specifically, as you look at the EA piece, so I'm assuming that the way ahead as we do this, because of the long drawn-out process of reciprocity, that as we teach the NSA-required pipeline courses to grow the EA, all the rest of the NETA classes and all the rest of the other pieces, that because we don't have that reciprocity agreement and we're not teaching KSAs, which is where we should eventually get to in the goal, that the intent is that we are going to actually teach through adjunct faculty type facilitation the actual NETA POI classes within the EA course. So that way we don't have to worry about the reciprocity, but the end goal is still to get to a KSA model, correct?
I would say that with the current stage of where CyberCom J7 is and with the current changes that NSA is making with their training path, that statement of, yes, that adjunct faculty should continue to train our force is probably, I would assess is probably the right way we're going right now. Just because with CyberCon J7 in the schoolhouse, we are still trying to identify what is the best way to train our EAs in that efficient, effective manner to where they're not going through duplicative training, to where we are satisfying not only the CyberCom requirements, but also the NSA requirements. So yes, I assess that we will still continue to use that adjunct faculty model to ensure that we teach our operational force because of the iterations that we will need. Like if NSA is only hosting 5 NETA courses, but we need 10, right? And we have the adjunct faculty and the ability to do that, to rapidly train our forces. I can foresee that still being a thing. However, in the future, I know that is one of CyberCom and the schoolhouse's goals is to try to identify where that efficiency is, and to shorten that training and that burden, and also on the operational force to train their own personnel.
Good morning. I'm Chief White. I'm with the Cyber School.
Good morning, sir.
Hey, sir. Hey, so I guess continuing the question of reciprocity, and maybe it's way too far or it's too far in the future, but for both, what does that certification look like if you have a senior operator or senior EA who's been operating on the CyberCom infrastructure? What's the timeline, the training delta? What's the investment of the team that owns that person to get certified to operate on the NSA side?
That's a great question, and it is entirely dependent on the operational force, unfortunately. We've identified a handful of items with the Cyber Command J7 as to ways that the formal training solutions can help better identify what a person has actually done in those formal training courses, to buy down some of the JQR items and whatnot. And NSA has a couple of methods that they're utilizing now for their Forge graduates. So somebody would move from the Cyber Command side, move up onto the NSA side, do the things that NSA is asking of its typical Forge graduate to do the same type of thing, to buy down that qualification time a little bit. But it still comes down to how many trainers are available, how many operations are available, et cetera, et cetera. We're never, I don't see it in any way, shape, or form. NSA's been doing this for about 40 years now in this manner. I don't see them changing. I don't see Cyber Command changing in terms of that qualification requirement of moving entirely away from real-world situations in order to get final qualification in some method. And that's always going to come down to where are you, what's the op tempo, how many people are able to are there and qualified to actually train you to those things.
And the operator experience kind of comes into play as well then, sounds like. So it might be a tailored thing. It might be vary by person, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Similar question or too early to think about?
Yeah, so for the EA side of the house, I know that the J7 team has created a Tiger team, and one of the topics that they are working on in a working group forum is how do we identify opportunities for reciprocity, whether that be in the certification process or whether that be in training. So that is an initiative within a working group that that Tiger team is looking to explore. Just at this time, it's not there yet.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Lieutenant Colonel Gibbs, Army IG. I have a question. The work that you've done so far for the training and certification of the operators, are there any discussions about using that to inform training and certification of the enablers? I'm talking to lawyers, the logisticians, HR professionals, everything else you need to do your jobs. Are any of those discussions happening now that you're seeing?
So those work roles are only team level work roles. So whenever CYBERCOM came up with their joint curriculum concept, they're only focusing on work roles at different teams. So generally the Army got kind of the work roles on CMPs, the Navy generally got the CPT work roles, and the Air Force generally got the CSC work roles. So anything outside of those team work roles is not covered. So as far as additional training that's needed for a lawyer, for a strategic planner, because you have planners that are outside of the team, that's actually not covered under the JCL concept. Not to say that it shouldn't be covered under a different concept, but that's not what JCL was set up for. The Joint Curriculum Lead was strictly to get after readiness, and if it's team readiness, because outside of teams, they don't look at readiness, but our cyber as a headquarters doesn't get a readiness rating, but it's all team level ratings. The other thing is if you look over at that DoD executive agent for ACT, so we know that the SecDef designated the Sec Army as executive agent for ACT. We delegate down to TradeOps CG, we delegate down to the Cyber School Commandant. But I know it's too hard, but if you could actually read that, we don't know what executive agent for ACT means yet. So the directive, this was back October 1st, 2020. I think in this memo it directed the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel Readiness to have a directive published by 1 October of 2021. That directive has been published yet. I think it's ready. It's up there for signature, but I know just a month ago there were some rewrites that were being done. So within that, you know, when you say executive agent for advanced cyber training, everyone kind of, who in here knows what advanced cyber training is? Because I don't, and I'm the one who's about to have to execute this. In the memo, it's defined as, advanced cyber training is defined as foundation level training for a particular CMF work category and common position training. I don't know what that means. Is that every single work role? Is that the, I mean, by this, it could be the cryptologic work roles, but clearly NSA is responsible for cryptologic work role training. I mean, that is documented in other DoD directives. So, and if you say, okay, the NSA is still going to have the cryptologic work roles, okay, which ones are the cryptologic work roles? Which ones are the cyber work roles? Which ones are something that's completely different that's not either cryptologic or cyber? So, I mean, you know, language analysts, that probably, that's an Intel work role, right? That's probably falling under cryptologic. What about the targeteer? It depends on which service you ask. It could be a cryptologic work role. You talk to probably the Air Force. It could be a non-cryptologic work role. You talk to probably the Army. We have 131s, right? They're not Intel work. So what does this mean? From what I've seen in the DoD directive, it's not going to parse that out. The other thing is, I know Sergeant Major mentioned it probably kind of past. So we're responsible for developing. Okay, we kind of know what develop training, deliver training, and that doesn't mean we're teaching it. When they say deliver, it means like I've got my package with the training. I'm going to deliver it to the Air Force who can then teach it. So deliver the training to another service so they can teach it on their own. And administer, we don't know what administer means either. Administer can be lots and lots of functions. We have a whole list of things with administering this. It doesn't mean train. They specifically say this is DoD executive agent for advanced cyber training curriculum. So one of the things that currently this precludes is the training of it. So the EA for ACT is not, under the current concept, supposed to train what Sergeant Major Bosman briefed was a proposal. No, that's General Nakasone has approved that. If you're going to be an operator, do CNOQC. If you're going to do Title 10, you got to do BOC. If you're going to be a senior, you do the ASANS courses. If you're going to do AOCP once it's finished, and then you can be a senior doing Title 10 operations. NSA could come out on the same side. So NSA, CNOQC, they can do Forge or they can do the SANS. They could come out with their own procedures type courses that focus on, TTPs, policies, infrastructure tools that NSA uses to kind of from a procedural standpoint. Kind of what is covered under some of the Forge training, but they haven't done that yet. They could. NSA could do, that's what they're responsible for. They're responsible for NSA operations. They can still come out and do that. We've laid it out from a Title 10 aspect. This is what we're going to do. We don't really know what Title 50 aspect of NSA uses. EA is a proposal. Again, what Chief Northern showed was, hey, when we looked at it, 60% of the USCYBERCOM case acts for EA are not covered under existing training. So we need to get after something that addresses that 60% shortfall, which is what we've done kind of with the EA course to achieve that. We've executed several classes of the EA course already to get after that shortfall. But again, EA is a lot of attention has been paid to operator over the years. Everyone, if you go back to 2017 probably, different CyberCom commanders have all talked about operator based on it. We haven't paid the same attention to EAs. I think we're starting to because we've kind of got an operator way forward locked in. So I think a lot more attention is being paid to EAs. I think by having a lot of senior level attention being paid to it, that I think we'll probably start to lock in a definitive way forward for EAs. But again, it could go back to, is EA a cryptologic or a cyber workload? And that could define who's responsible for training them.
Yeah, I think we're nearing time. We'll get you as the last question, and unless anyone else has more.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. Patrick Zanellotti with Amazon. One question. We talked a lot about J7. Will J7 be sending funding down to the service components to support this type of effort, or will that be centralized within the service components still moving forward?
You got it.
So as of October 1st, 2024, Cyber Command's enhanced budget control takes over, which is basically Cyber Command will now be in control of all of the funding regarding exercises and training for the service cyber components, right? So instead of the service cyber components going to their respective services and going to Cyber Command in order to support all of their training initiatives and whatnot, all of that money will be basically handed out to the services from US Cyber Command. So it just puts them in a lot better control over what training is being paid for across all of the services.
So the clear separation is MOS training, service bill. If it's Cyber Command workload training, then it's a Cyber Command bill. And so that's what they're trying to figure out right now is if it's service specific versus Cyber Command. Another thing that Dr. Smith touched on is I can't remember the year, but Secretary Mattis built the Cyber Operation Forces, the COF memo. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. Inside of it, there were different designations. Most of the effort has been on COF 1 so far, which is the Cyber Mission Force. If you were able to listen to General Skinner this morning, you heard him talk about CSSPs. So now that we kind of have somewhat of a handle on the Cyber Mission Forces, go into the CSSPs, then we'll start to expand it to, I think what Cyber Command has in the Unified Command Plan now is Joint Force Trainer, which means across all of DOD they can direct training and certification standards, which I think will get after helping our IG teammates out, especially our lawyers, because that's always the hardest part, making sure they're comfortable with it, but then making sure everybody's trained and certified at the same standard. They don't normally give me this thing because I don't want to give it up.
Thank you, sir. Any final questions, comments, or concerns? Yes, Sergeant Major.
I'll just close to feedback to your question. So I'm Sergeant Major Potter. I represent 780th, so I am the recipient of all of what they're trying to train for the EAs and IONs. And so to answer your question specifically, it's not a technology part of what we're looking for. The system of record has already been designed for training. That is the PCTE, JCTE as the joint program of record. The thing that we struggle with both operationally from within my brigade and then also I know the cyber school struggles with as well is content creation. So when we look to industry and the industry experts, content creation falls within two primary categories. One is actually creating the scenarios and the real world capabilities to replicate reality within the PCT environment, which we absolutely need to rely on our industry partners for that part. The second part with that is what we've realized as we begin to progress out into some of our additional cyber forces when we start to talk about the 11th cyber and some of the other aspects, and then previously coming from the CPB for the DCO forces is enabling hardware, physical hardware within the loop, within the PCT environment. How do I actually have a physical device that I can sit right here on this table that I can interact with using the EMS and then have that device then be tied into PCTE and both on class and TS, so that way the rest of my elements would be able to interact with that physical hardware in the loop virtually. Because what we know in real world scenarios that when I virtualize something, whether I virtualize a router or a switch or an endpoint device within an environment, I'm limited in what I can actually do and how I interact with that piece of a virtualized equipment versus having an actual physical hardware that's tied in the loop. So to answer your question, speaking from my viewpoint as the operational force, and I know that carries on to both the cyber school's perspective, that's how industry can help us as we look at this training problem.
I second. I was kidding. All right. Well, thank you all for attending this session. Look forward to any follow-on questions that you may have. Thank you again.